portrait of a kingfish prophet named Zachary Hale Comstock, a proselytizing man whose delusions of divinity led him to build an ark made of stone and metal. With the dollars of Washington, he set the ark afloat in a sea of clouds and cast off for skies domestic and alien. And the world would never be the same. By the latter half of 1893, Columbia is well into its journey. A self-sufficient extension of the United States, it tours the globe, spreading its vision of the successful experiment called America. It is peopled by devotees of the prophet Comstock, who has been acting as the leader of Columbia and enjoying the image of a charismatic religious figure, like some 20th century televangelist whose megachurch defies gravity. To the citizenry, he is known as Father Comstock, and he is Columbia. However, the marvel that is the floating city would not have been possible without the pompadour genius of Rosalind Lutes, who has continued her work without halt. As mentioned in the last episode, her research into atomic manipulation led to the creation of the Lutes field, a means of suspending particles in space. This culminated with the Lutes particle, a device used to keep Columbia floating indefinitely. Rosalind's theories eventually would lead to an even more monumental discovery. As she continues her research into the Lutes field, Rosalind learns that one of the atoms that she has been measuring is also being measured by someone else, someone from another universe. And whoever is doing the measuring is using a device exactly like her Lutes field.
The Lutes field entangled my quantum atom with waves of light, allowing for safe measurement. Sound familiar, brother? That's because you were measuring precisely the same atom from a neighboring world. We used the universe as a telegraph. Switching the field on or off became dots and dashes. Dreadfully slow, but now you and I could whisper through the wall.
Rosalind attempts to communicate with this person across dimensions, using her Lutes field as a makeshift telegraph, turning it on and off at regular intervals to emulate Morse code. Strangely enough, she gets a response. When brought to his attention, Comstock agrees to fund further research into the phenomena, which eventually results with the creation of the Lutes tear, a machine with the power to create fissures in the fabric of space-time. These act as windows, revealing brief glimpses of other worlds, other Earths, some where Columbia exists, some where it never came to be. Comstock sees these tears as peepholes into prophecy, as the Lord speaking to him through the strange tongue of science. Rosalind sees them for what they truly are, as confirmation into the existence of multiple realities. How validating it must have been for her to not only realize her life's work, but to also find truth in the dream she had had as a child. For between the cracks in space-time, she spies someone familiar. Herself. Except different. This version of Lutes is a man. Robert Lutes shares Rosalind's ingenuity, as it was he who was communicating with her using his own version of the Lutes field. They collaborate across dimensions, building the Lutes tear together, and on October 15, 1893, Robert manages to enter into Rosalind's Columbia. However, not without considerable strain on his part.
You have been transfused, brother, into a new reality, but your body rejects the cognitive dissonance through confusion and hemorrhage. But we are together, and I will mend you. For what separates us now but a single chromosome?
Cross-dimensional travel is a taxing affair, and as we'll come to see, the universe doesn't care who you are, genius, drunk, or demigod. All are subject to the same laws. Like Booker and Comstock are two different people, so are Rosalind and Robert. They have different ideologies, with Rosalind leaning more on the fatalistic or deterministic side, and Robert embracing the potential for causality.
Coming here was your idea.
My idea?
I've made it very clear that I don't believe in the exercise.
The rowing?
No. Imagine that's a wonderful exercise.
Then what?
The entire thought experiment.
Excuse me. How much longer?
One goes into an experiment knowing one could fail.
But one does not undertake an experiment knowing one has failed.
While the pair may not align philosophically, they share a fondness for each other. They also share a genius unheard of in modern science, and it's their combined brain power that would eventually usher Columbia into a new era of advancement. Before that occurs, the city of Columbia prepares to celebrate another pairing, one formed of love. Father Zachary Hale Comstock is to be married. The bride-to-be is someone we met in the last episode, not in this universe, mind you, but in another. Annabelle Watson is a woman with a penchant for the decadent. She dalliances with many suitors until the day a certain prophet sets her on the righteous path.
To those who loved me, I was the most generous of souls. There was no pain I would deny them, no betrayal I would not gladly give. And when I had scorched the hearts of all who loved me, the prophet said, "There is nothing you can do for which I will not forgive you. For God has granted me sight, and through his eyes, even you are loved."
Comstock offers Annabelle the chance for redemption. He also offers her his hand in marriage, and the two quickly tie a knot. Annabelle Watson adopts his surname, becoming Lady Annabelle Comstock, the First Lady of Columbia. She assumes the role of that of a matriarch, spreading Comstock's teachings and performing acts of kindness to the Columbian citizenry.
Love the prophet because he loves the sinner. Love the sinner because he is you. Without the sinner, what need is there for a redeemer? Without sin, what grace has forgiveness?
Lady Comstock's love for her husband runs deep, rivaled only by the reverence Columbian citizens feel for her. Sadly, like with Booker and his Annabelle, it is not meant to last. Around the same time Robert comes to Columbia, Comstock is making extensive use of Lutece's device, opening tears and observing the possibilities of other worlds beyond. He has a vested interest in the events that might be, which he perceives as events that will be. To Comstock, tears are windows into the future, granted to him by the Archangel, and through one of these windows, he spies another Columbia. And what he sees scares him. Comstock becomes convinced that the prosperity of Columbia will only be ensured so long as his bloodline remains in power. He decides to conceive a child with the First Lady. Their first attempt, however, is met with failure, as is their next, and so forth unto heartache.
The Archangel tells me that Columbia will only survive so long as my line sits the throne. Yet Lady Comstock produces no child. I have done what a man can do, yet there is no child. I've asked Lutece about the matter, but even she refuses to help.
Lady Comstock is barren, or so the prophet believes. In truth, it is he who is to blame.
Comstock seems to have been made sterile by simple exposure to our contraption. A theory. Just as sexual reproduction can de-emphasize the traits of each parent, so goes the effect of multiple realities on our own. Your traits dissipate until they become unrecognizable or cease to exist.
Whether or not Comstock knew of this sterility is unknown. It should be noted that Rosalind's revelatory on the entropy of genes voxophone was recorded July 3, 1893, over 2 months before the prophet recorded his own. Judging by Comstock's tone in his recording, he likely blamed the First Lady for their inability to conceive and knew nothing of his condition. Either way, the prophet becomes so desperate to produce a successor that he eventually propositions Rosalind, who, unsurprisingly, turns him down. She and her brother agree to formulate an alternative for him, one that will have far-reaching ramifications, not just in their universe, but across all universes. Using the Lutece device, Robert and Rosalind scour the multiverse in search of a Comstock with a child. They find him, or a version of him, from before his rebirth, from his life as Booker DeWitt. When we last saw Booker, he was sinking deep into depression. No longer with the Pinkertons, he now resides in New York City, where he struggles to make ends meet as a private detective. Hounded by loan sharks and stuck in a drink-fueled rut, Robert Lutece appears to him, acting as a soft-spoken emissary with promises of fortune. A fortune belonging to an unnamed benefactor, who we know is Comstock. Robert tells Booker that his benefactor would be willing to wipe his debt clean, in exchange for him giving up his infant daughter, Anna. What should be a no-brainer ends with the father making a terrible choice. Booker agrees to the trade, and though it doesn't take long for him to see the error of his ways, it ultimately proves to be an act unpardonable.
Give her back, you son of a bitch!
It's ready! Go!
No!
Shut down the machine!
No!
Shut it
Anna!
down! Shut down the
Anna!
machine! Now do it!
Give me back my daughter! No!
Anna is ripped from the arms of her real father by the covetous embrace of a fake one, losing a piece of herself in the process. Half her pinky is severed by the closing tear, and it remains behind in Booker's universe. Anna DeWitt resides in two worlds at once now, and as a result, she will someday become the most powerful person in the multiverse. But for now, a baby is just a baby. Booker in turn spirals further down the rabbit hole, hitting rock bottom, where he will remain for the next 19 years, until a familiar face offers him a chance for penance. Back in his own universe, Comstock presents the child to both the First Lady and the rest of Columbia. He names her Elizabeth, and refers to her as the Lamb of Columbia. Publicly, Comstock claims Elizabeth was a miracle child, gestating in Lady Comstock's womb for a mere 7 days before entering the world. Behind closed doors, however, Comstock must have told his wife something else. It is never revealed exactly what he explained of Elizabeth's origins. Perhaps he claimed she was created by one of Lutes's devices. Ultimately, whatever fabrication he came up with, Lady Comstock did not believe. In the aftermath of Elizabeth's arrival, Robert and Rosalind struggle with feelings of unease towards the prophet. However, they are also complicit of his actions, knowing full well that they played as much a role in the abduction of Anna DeWitt as he did.
Brother, I have told you many times that I encountered this particular Caesar before he crossed the Rubicon. When I met Comstock, he was little more than a preacher, able to move both members of the flock or members of Congress with equal dexterity. He believed in my work, and his influence bought the funds I so needed. And if he wanted to use tares to play prophet, that was his prerogative. But at some point, the man became incapable of distinguishing his performance from his person. I sit in judgment. But then again, it was I who built the stage.
By the end of 1894, Comstock's relationship with his wife has become strained. She has grown unsure of him, of their marriage, as the prophet begins to commit acts of violence against political enemies.
Tonight, the prophet moved against his political enemies. He preaches mercy, but 40 souls lie tonight dead in unmarked graves. If a man was ever unworthy of grace, who would be my husband? But when I was beyond redemption, he offered it anyway. How can I deny forgiveness to one who with love granted it to me?
By the beginning of 1895, Lady Comstock becomes convinced Elizabeth is the result of an affair involving her husband and Rosalind Lutes.
Lady Comstock seems to believe the child is a result of some errant act of carnality between myself and her beloved prophet. I told the poor woman the truth, that the child was a product of our little contraption, but I think she found that less believable than her delusion.
Lady Comstock struggles to understand the truth. After 2 years of complacence, she makes a hard choice. She chooses to reveal everything.
Lutes says the bastard is a creation not of her womb, but of some unholy science. I do not know which is true. The child is no more divine than I. What says that for my husband's prophecy? He begs my silence, but I can only offer him forgiveness. But with repentance need come truth. I can suffer his lies no longer.
Sadly, the truth sounds the death knell in her name. Lady Annabelle Comstock is murdered, with the act being committed by her scullery maid, or so the Columbian populace is led to believe. The truth of her death is well known to us all at this point. Lady Comstock's assassination had been arranged by the Prophet in an attempt to prevent the truth of Elizabeth's origin from becoming public knowledge. The man responsible for the assassination, Jeremiah Fink, and the woman framed for the murder, Daisy Fitzroy, are pivotal to the history and future of Columbia. Because there is so much to their narrative, we're going to reserve exploring their characters for the next episode, where we can devote the proper amount of time to them. For now, Lady Comstock is laid to rest in Emporia, while her supposed murderer flees into the underbelly of Columbia. In the wake of her death, a mythology is birthed to aggrandize her legacy. Her remains are preserved in a hermetically sealed casket, similar to that of Vladimir Lenin, and a statue of her likeness is constructed outside the entrance to Comstock House, where well-wishers can gather to mourn and celebrate her memory. A group of devotees called the Zealots of the Lady take to adorning caskets with her image and strapping those caskets like backpacks to their back in remembrance of her.
Sweet Mother of Columbia, why do we worship three symbols in your memory? We worship the sword so that we might avenge you. We worship the raven so that we might cover the city with eyes. We worship the coffin because it symbolizes the weight of our faith.
Lastly, the design for the First Lady's portrait is an exact recreation of the Alice Roosevelt Longworth photograph, which begs the question, does the game's fiction imply that the idea for the portrait was stolen from the real-world counterpart? As we'll see in the next episode, there are plenty of examples of intellectual property theft to be found throughout Columbia, so it is not out of the question. In spite of its political turmoil, Columbia is still the apple of American pride. The feeling, however, is not mutual. With the ideological shift ushered in by the Civil War, Comstock's patriotism becomes stunted, and it begins to liken the U.S. to the biblical city of Sodom. Like any prophet worth his grain of salt, Comstock predicts the coming of a cataclysm, a flood, not of water, but of change. And like with another biblical flood, he believes the only hope for salvation is an ark.
And the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great, and he repented he had made man on the earth. Rain! 40 days and 40 nights of the stuff, and he left not a thing that walked alive. You see, my friends, even God is entitled to a do-over. And what is Columbia if not another ark? For another time.
Of course, you don't need to be prescient to read the writing on the wall. Comstock isn't really a prophet. He's a smoke and mirrors con man, and Columbia is not a new America. It is simply an extension of the one which died on May 9th, 1865. And if Comstock has his way, it's only a matter of time before that bygone America is resurrected. While Columbia is touring on one side of the globe, tensions are mounting on the other. Let's take a detour from the fiction of BioShock Infinite for a quick history lesson. In the latter 19th century, the Chinese had suffered a series of defeats at the hands of invading Japanese forces, who annexed conquered territories for themselves. As a result, anti-foreigner sentiments sprouted, which resulted with economic problems and rampant banditry. Adding fuel to the fire, many Chinese harbored resentment towards the myriad of religious institutions that had pervaded their country over the years, particularly Christianity. This culminated with the founding of the Righteous and Harmonious Fists, a militia which consisted of people displaced by imperialist occupation and motivated by anti-foreigner sentiments. In the West, this group was referred to as the Boxers. They adopted the slogan, "Support the Qing, destroy the foreigners," and inspired many to enlist, embarking on a campaign of violence against Christian missionaries and converts. Honed by stringent physical training, the Boxers claimed to be impervious to foreign artillery. Comstock would put that claim to the test. This is likely where the fiction meets the real. While there aren't exact timeframes given for Columbia's intervention, we know it retaliated against the Boxers sometime in the year 1901. After learning that the Boxers were holding Americans hostage, Comstock opens fire on Peking, revealing that Columbia is as much a battleship as it is a city. The assault on the Chinese capital also involves the deployment of ground troops, as we know Cornelius Slate, who we met in the last episode, participates in the siege. Slate loses his left eye in the carnage, as well as 30 of his comrades. What happens to him next will be explored in the next episode. Interestingly, the Boxers and Columbia function as thematic parallels. Both display a violent aversion to foreign influence, however. Whereas the Chinese are justified in their distrust, Columbia is not, acting out of xenophobia. As we have seen numerous times thus far, many of Infinite's story components play with the idea of parallelism in the form of duality. Just look at Booker and Comstock. More so, some of the characters' individual philosophies riff off this idea, such as Robert and Rosalind respectively adhering to notions of causality and determinism. They are two sides of the same coin. With that in mind, it should be of no surprise that the coin toss at the beginning of the game is alluding to something more than probability. This is a trend that will continue throughout the game and beyond. In the wake of the Peking incident, the United States government formally condemns Columbia's actions and recalls its city back to Washington so that the prophet may stand trial for his crimes. In a fury, Father Zachary Comstock responds with the proverbial "when pigs fly." Comstock views the U.S. as weak, as craven. To him and the rest of Columbia, these colors don't run. On July 6, 1902, Comstock not only refuses to return, but also declares Columbia's secession from the Union. This event is annually celebrated as Columbia's Independence Day, as is trumpeted liberation for the Sodom below. It's a citywide holiday, commemorating everything from the founding of the city to the quote-unquote birth of their child. It's a day of merriment, where people try their luck at carnival games and indulge in ice cream, and where folksy Americana reigns supreme. Columbia's Independence Day is fun for the whole family. That is, assuming your family is white. If not, then July 6 is a date of fear, patterned after every nightmare conjured up in the mind of a fleeing slave since time immemorial. Columbia fails to recognize the dignity and value and lives of its non-white citizens. And while the principalities may falter, somewhere, in the dark of a Columbian ghetto, there's someone who won't. A woman, ready to color over the white sheen of the city's veneer with a color more indelible, the color red. And if she has it her way, these colors will run.